The end of One Piece is near, or at least nearer than it ever has been before. As a longtime fan, being able to say that with the amount of certainty I have is extremely surreal. As of the end of Wano, Oda has swiftly guided us into the final saga, and so far it's been nothing short of spectacular. Now, how long this final saga will last is kinda up in the air. Oda suggested he'd like to wrap it up in 3-ish years, which would line up with his projection from a couple years back, that being 5 years total. But I believe he's keeping a degree of leniency with this thought. Does this belief come from not wanting to see the series end? Partially, maybe even mostly if we're being honest, but regardless of how I feel about seeing it end, it's almost impossible to ignore the fact that we clearly are headed toward it. Let's just take a quick look at the events of post-Wano. The Straw Hat Pirates are now a fully fledged Emperor crew. The crews of other emperors like Blackbeard, Shanks, and Buggy, and by extension of Buggy, Mihawk, and Crocodile, are all making their moves. The world government is taking increasingly drastic steps, and their conflict with the revolutionaries is being brought to the forefront. And last but not least, Vegapunk, a character shrouded in mystery for over half of the series, is finally being revealed to us. All of these major pieces for the finale of the story are being put in place. Pieces that have eagerly been awaiting in the background to be played for years and years. And I really don't think there's been a more exciting time to be a fan of the series. So let's discuss what the series has to offer for us going forward and what this final saga may just end up looking like. So where do we go from here? Well, throughout Wano there was a pretty firm projection of the course of the story in the minds of readers, mainly being that the next island we'll travel to is Elbaf. Well, if you're caught up to the manga, you'll know Oda has thrown a wrench into those plans, and it's just fantastic. We've arrived at Egghead, Island of the Future, home of the world-renowned scientist Dr. Vegapunk. It's a step almost nobody expected, yet if you really think about things, it is pretty much the only next logical step for the story. Going back to that story projection most fans had in their mind, this arc didn't really slot into what people felt the story had room for. Most would say Elbaf first, some smaller arc, whether that be God Valley or Lodestar for God knows why, then Laugh Tale and the final war, assuming that background world things, like the Revolutionary Army, would fill themselves in between arcs or slot somewhere along the line in one of those locations I mentioned. The fact that we're on Egghead now goes to show a couple things. First, even at this late stage in the story, Oda is completely unpredictable. Second, your preconceptions about what Oda has to do next should be thrown into the trash, like immediately. And third, the most important thing, Oda has a clear course for the story in mind. Leading up to Egghead, we got the reveal of the Seraphim, the special science project helmed by Vegapunk that had been hinted at since at least the Reverie. You also have, like I mentioned, the revolutionaries coming into play. Now, there was a long-running theory that Vegapunk himself was tied to the Revolutionary Army, which stemmed from him leaving some agency in Kuma after operating on him. Spoiler alert, this theory was recently confirmed. At the end of the last chapter, we see Vegapunk communicating with Dragon. There's also the fact that other Revolutionary Army members' stories are coming to the forefront, namely Kuma himself. Then you also have Bonnie being brought into the story, who has had seeds planted for this plotline since pre-timeskip. Basically, all of these plot threads are coalescing around Vegapunk. So while this arc may have come as a shock and may seem like a sidestep to some, it's wholly essential, and actually, it's pretty clear that Oda planned for us to be going here next. Now, what exactly can we expect from this arc? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Oda is still very unpredictable, so expect the unexpected. But I do think there are a couple things we're certain to get. With Bonnie and Kuma, I think it's pretty clear we're about to get information on Kuma's past, and by extension Bonnie's as well, since they're related. There are a lot of mysteries about Kuma that need to be answered at this moment. Like, why was he framed as a tyrant by the world government when it's so clear he's a kind-hearted person? What sort of manipulation is at play by the world government that made Kuma feel like he had no choice but to allow himself to be experimented on? And with Bonnie, what about her is so important to the world government that Sakazuki was scared when she had escaped? Does it tie into her devil fruit power? What exactly is the extent of that power? Is there some secret about the devil fruit we don't know? These characters have been built up in the back for years, and now that they're in the forefront, I find it very unlikely we'll sail away from the island with many questions lingering about them. With that stuff, you also have to consider that Kuma's story is intrinsically tied to the Revolutionary Army, so it isn't unreasonable to expect a closer look at who Dragon is as a character, what motivates him, and maybe what the next step of the Revolutionary Army is. Then, of course, we are getting Vegapunk. Everything there is to know about Vegapunk, we're getting it. This is the arc dedicated to him, and with recent developments, finding out he suspects he's going to die soon, it seems we won't have much longer to explore this character, so be prepared to get it all right now. Oda has kept this ace up his sleeve for a long time. Now, he's revealing it and playing it 100%. When it comes to the arc length though, I'm leaning toward a sort of breather arc. After massive arcs like we just had with Wano, Oda typically likes to take some time to cool down. You can see this in effect with Zou. I think it's incredibly important for the pacing of the story to not jump right from one big story arc to another, and obviously Oda feels the same way. So like Zou, I can see Egghead lasting around 25 to 30 chapters, maybe a little bit more, unlikely any less. Just long enough to give us plenty of details for Oda to show us everything that he needs to show without it overstaying its welcome. Now, what about after Egghead? Well, looking at recent story events, I think we can start to get a picture of where the story will go after this arc. The big thing to consider is Blackbeard. After his attack on Amazon Lily, Blackbeard now holds one of Luffy's friends, being Kobe, and after this clash with Law, there's a good chance that number will soon be 2. Let's be real, there is no shot of Law beating Blackbeard here. It doesn't make any sense for the narrative to have someone built up for decades to be taken out right as the story is ramping up to its climax. Blackbeard will acquire more poneglyphs from Law, and now he has a means of reading them in his possession, as we see his crew has kidnapped Pudding, meaning that Blackbeard is getting extremely close to being able to reach Laugh-Tale. All of this puts him on a collision course with Luffy. Now, whether that's immediately after Egghead is yet to be seen. Is this set up for even further along in the story? I think there's a really good chance of that as well. There are still other things that need to be addressed, like Shanks. It's just nailing down the order that Oda will address these things is borderline impossible. But going with that Shanks idea, to me this seems pretty likely, especially if you subscribe to the idea that Blackbeard will be the very endgame opponent. Now, I, as well as most, have not let go of the idea of visiting Elbaf. I think that location is set in stone. There's just too much setup for it for Oda to skip, especially considering the fact that Oda has been heavily inspired by Norse mythology and Vikings. This is an island that Oda has clearly wanted to explore for a long time. So we're certainly going there. And if we connect some dots thinking there must be some sort of conflict at the location, we come away with a couple options. There could be some arc-specific bad guy to topple, but with how close to the endgame we are, I think Oda will use this as a chance to bring a remaining threat of sorts to light. I have a hard time seeing Blackbeard serve this role, so I'm leaning towards Shanks. Elbaf could be part of his territory, and this could be the location for his reunion with Luffy. Shanks is a character shrouded in mystery, especially when it comes to what his motivations are, and his history with Luffy doesn't suggest a straight-up battle, so it's pretty unclear how this will play out. But seeing as how he's been around since chapter 1, Oda has something big planned for this moment. This is a pretty common idea in the fandom. One way or another, these two have to meet in some fashion before the major climax of the series, and I feel like we could be seeing it in the very near future. As more and more pieces fall into place, it's going to grow increasingly clear when that final climactic arc is about to begin, but for now there's still a lot of room for Oda to do practically whatever he wants. Regardless of what specific choices he makes, this is by far the most turbulent time the story has ever been in, and it's bound to just get crazier and crazier right up until the very end. Oda said it himself, it's time for him to reveal all the mysteries of the world, and I have never been so ready. How do you feel about the future of One Piece? Are you enjoying the current developments, the current arc? Where do you think we'll head to next? What in the future of the story are you most looking forward to seeing? Let me know in the comments section below. That's all for this video, so thank you for watching, and until next time.